Okay, so this is Philosophy of Medicine COVID-19 by Alex Broadbent. Philosophy of Medicine, which is apparently a new journal. Started during the pandemic in 2020. And so this is a perspective. It's like a little editorial. I think Broadbent is one of the editors. But yeah, so that'll be good. So let's just check this out, 6 pages, and hopefully, get some perspective, as it were. And as always, feel free to ask questions, everyone. If you're watching later on the YouTubes, leave a comment. Alright. What should philosophers do during a pandemic? What should philosophers of medicine do when large numbers of people die, government policies whiplash, large chunks of the world shut down, inequalities deepen, unemployment rockets, livelihoods evaporate, education is disrupted or terminated, social and conventional media goes chaotic, peer review becomes the old normal, and science is both deified and demonized, all because of a disease? That's a sentence. We, philosophers of medicine, have both the advantage and disadvantage of knowing what we actually did in such a situation. The advantage is the opportunity to take instruction, and the disadvantage is the risk, temptation, propensity, or other disposition to defend actual responses that were wrong or right for the wrong reasons. We also run the risk of unfairly and ineptly criticizing scientific and policy responses that were reasonable or affirming the unreasonable, with the false sense of expertise that hindsight generates. As an editor of this journal, one thing I know that we philosophers of medicine did was to publish articles in specialized academic journals. The ones in this issue are excellent, and I'm proud to have been involved in their publication. There are many more in other journals, and perhaps some of these are even almost as good. Wow. Throw some shade at your competitors. Yet most people will not read any of them. Yeah, well, that's true. This kind of contribution, scholarship, is important. That's why we, the editorial team of this journal, the subject editors, the governing board, the editorial advisory board, and all the many peer reviewers whom we call upon, devote so much of our mortal allotment to it. Yet it is not, I believe, the only contribution that philosophy can make to the affairs of the world. So I want to use this venue, one that is not public-facing but is addressed to academics in the field, to ask, what else did we philosophers of medicine contribute to the response to this global crisis on our intellectual doorstep? All right, so this is a open access journal, first of all. I just want to get that clear. They published specialized papers, but they did it in a way that anyone could access, and they probably did it, as best as they could have done, given the situation where a lot of the stuff that academics rely upon was falling apart too. It's not like academics had a better setup to do their work. Maybe it was more convenient because a lot of it was done over email anyway. But the question is, what could academics do better? Granted, I'm sitting here doing public philosophy, and all y'all out there watching are consuming public philosophy, but that's not how academics are thinking of what they're doing. So straight up, you're not there's the only real answer here is that they have to be more public, and whatever does that mean. Who is the public in terms of philosophers of medicine? Who is that, and how do you engage with them? All right, yeah, and so here we go. I didn't even read the next line, and this is the question. And this has always been one of the questions I have. Who actually is the public when you say public philosophy? What is that? There is no... It's always defined negatively. It's not the academic philosophers. It's everyone else. That doesn't help. So, but who is the public? And especially in the coronavirus times, pandemic times, everyone else includes all the people affected by the pandemic, but again, it makes more of a difference for policymakers, people who are trying to, deal with the pandemic. All right, let's see what the author says. One kind of engagement that philosophers might have is with the formation and evaluation of policy, or working on ethics committees, being included in response teams, and so forth. Philosophers who were in a position to contribute in this way during the pandemic were generally there because they were already engaged in this world, following a lengthy process of positioning themselves there over a long period of time. Most philosophers, even of the applied stripe, are not directly involved in policy work, and to argue that they should be would to be argue for a fundamental change in the nature of the discipline, one that I do not approve of. My concern is with the philosopher of medicine, broadly construed, who finds himself in the midst of an emerging health crisis, wondering whether they have anything useful to say, whether to say it, and how. Yeah, I mean, again, you can't actually do a lot of public philosophy in academia because that's not what you're getting paid for. It's just economics at that point. Thus, the more accessible sort of contribution that philosophers might make is participation in something commonly called public debate. We often feel guilty about not doing this and nervous to try, and often we don't much like what those philosophers who do participate have to say. It's not clear what we have to contribute. Conceptual clarity sounds and often is patronizing, and it is itself ironically unclear. Contemporary philosophers of something, tend to aspire to something different and more substantive, a kind of contribution that is not emptily formal, but is involved in some degree with the content of the matter at hand. Yet how are we to do this if we are not experts? I mean, this is always one of these catch-22s. Like, if you are an expert in philosophy, you're spending most of your time being an expert in philosophy. You're not going to be an expert in public policy, and so to ask a philosopher of medicine to be an expert in public policy that is like important right now, that means they'd have to be experts in two things. Why is this collapsing? Huh, interesting. I have to fix something. Let's see if it fixes itself. That would be interesting if it fixed itself. We will find out. My Stream Deck is starting to collapse, and I don't understand why. It's been, mostly good, and then all of a sudden now it's collapsing because I changed something. I apologize for the slight break while I attempt to fix it. Alright, anywho, so we are sometimes hamstrung by an eerily Kantian idea that we can contribute in the world of concepts but not experience. But this is an outmoded idea. No longer do many philosophers believe there is an iron curtain between synthetic and analytic statements, a priori and a posteriori knowledge. We philosophers of medicine, broadly construed, sure can help to clarify relevant concepts. Relevant concepts, but this requires our having relevant knowledge of the field too. Who you are who and this is what. I am Noger, Nogrio, I don't know. People call me a lot of stuff. And this is what? This is called Philosophy Roulette, where I find a random philosophy paper and I read it and try to figure out if it says anything of worth. This particular philosophy paper, and welcome in Lermfish, is talking about philosophers of medicine and could they have done better during the pandemic. They're trying to discuss how bad did philosophers just shirk their responsibilities. So this is what I do in Philosophy Roulette. It's roulette because you can land on crap paper sometimes. I don't know what this is, my first time reading it. Yeah, philosophers of medicine. What is it to be a medical doctor? What is it to actually go in and tell people they're sick? What is it to go to analyze pandemic data? The science behind that has issues, ethical, practical, all sorts of stuff. There's philosophers of medicine. It's your Viper says, I'm guessing they fucked up if they're writing a paper about how bad they fucked up. Well, yes, but that doesn't mean that they're gonna actually come off that bad. They can say, look, we did okay, but we fucked up these things, but you only know that in hindsight. We couldn't have known that ahead of time. It also might be a little bit of a window dressing to just get people's attention too. They might say we didn't fuck up that bad, but you have to say we did something, because if you say rah rah we kicked ass, no one's gonna give a shit. So Lermfish asks, what is philosophy? Just thinking and stuff, right? A lot of times, yeah. the real problem is that, like, who gives a shit if you're just thinking about stuff? The idea is that you're gonna have to think about something that people care about, and that's gonna make a difference eventually to somebody. And so you can just think about stuff, but I don't think anyone really gives a shit what's going on in my head most days. And most of the time, it's not that interesting. Like, most of the time, all I'm thinking about is, you know, I'm hungry or something. Then why can you get a PhD if no one cares? Well, that's the thing. People sometimes do care. And if you get yourself into any science or any not science, any systematic thing. Like, if you're a musician, there's a philosophy, there's aesthetics. If you are a computer scientist, there's a philosophy of computation. Why can you make programs that do certain things and not other things? What is AI? You are going to run into certain problems that you can't solve, and that philosophers have been working on for a long time. So, you know, what happened to, you know, in the 1800s, where people were dealing with physics, and basically what happened was you could get so good at physics that you no longer had to think about anything else other than physics. But, like, it used to just be natural philosophy, and then so physicists just kind of went off and did their own thing because they didn't need to deal with other stuff. But, like, before that, it was just thinking about the physics, but, you know, eventually it made a difference. People do care about physics because that's how you get, like, you know, lasers and stuff, and we like lasers, and we like nuclear power plants, and we like spaceships. So people do care eventually. But the idea that, like, you know, people don't care, no, people do care. It's just there's not always a practical thing, but you find out eventually. And if you're interested in something, then you can go read up on it, and you will see what people have been saying about it for a long time and what people are saying about it now, and then you can understand what's going on a little bit. So in the grand scheme of things, people do care. Granted, most of the time they don't care about, like, anything I'm particularly saying, but, like, there's big ideas. Like I said, AI nowadays. Like, why are what's the value of video games? Things like that. Like, you might care if you're on Twitch. Then what are my credentials? I don't have any credentials. I just sit here and bullshit. My bullshit, on the other hand, is very good. I am a published philosopher. I don't have any letters after my name. Oh, I have a BA. I have a BA in philosophy. Is not worth anything in the grand scheme of philosophy world. There are very smart people in chat. They seem to call me out. Yes, I am just some silly guy on the internet. That is correct, Mr. Partyarty, as is Mr. Partyarty apparently too. You can judge for yourself. If I say smart things, learn fish. If I say dumb things, you can call me out and you can never come back. That's basically it. The idea that you have credentials to read philosophy, you don't need credentials to read the philosophy. But, like, if you want to get, like, go anywhere into academia, you're going to need that because, you know, schools need to show that they have, like, hired good people, basically. And if you get yourself a PhD, you probably know something about one of the areas in philosophy pretty well. It's very hard. So you can see, though, that this is Philosophy Roulette 389. If you want to see my, if I'm any good at this, there are 388 previous episodes. You can go through my VODs. I also have a YouTube. Feel free if you. So, yeah. But yeah, if you want to learn something about, like, how to read philosophy, I can actually show you. Like, you can go through, talk about what these people are talking about, and understand why did they write this down, and why should anyone give a shit about that. So, that's basically it. Why should we give a shit about what anyone's writing? Like, sometimes they have ideas. Sometimes they do. Like, I'm not kidding. It's like, not everyone's a moron. Like, some of these people are pretty smart. So, So anyway, feel free to ask questions. I'm just going to keep reading and see if we can figure this out. So, the difference between us, that's the philosophers of medicine, and physicians, epidemiologists, and so on, those commonly seen as experts on health and disease, lies in the kind of knowledge we have. This distinction undermines the idea that there is only one kind of expert for each domain, one of the unfortunate refrains of the pandemic. We are experts in biomedical science as much as is a biomedical scientist, but our expertise concerns a different set of facts, if that is the right word, about biomedical science. So here's your answer. Real simple. The philosophers of medicine know something about biomedical science, but it doesn't entirely overlap with what a biomedical scientist does. They understand different things about it. An author says, to illustrate this point, I will focus on science. Perhaps there is no unified thing called science. However, science as a general notion and the word science played a major role in the pandemic, and many philosophers have investigated science construed generally, and in doing so, we have come to know things. We philosophers of medicine are in a position to apply this knowledge to the health sciences in particular, and scientists don't know what we know. So this is the whole thing right here. Why do you care? Why should you care? The philosophers of medicine are positioned to know how to apply knowledge we've gained to the health sciences in particular, and the scientists can't do this themselves. Right there. And this is also to what Viper said. Why are they writing this paper? Because they want to say, we know shit. We're important and you should like us. But you can see that happened right there. Like, this is to what you're saying. Did they fuck up? Yes. But they want to say, but you should still listen to us. Right there. Okay. So, author says, we know, for example, about Thomas Kuhn's paradigm-shifting critique of the neutrality of science. So we know that follow the science is not a nonsense, but the slogan of a socio-political intervention. We know that interests are part of the explanation, not just for scientific priorities, but also theories and even observations. This is a good point. The idea that there's just a straight-up observation already presupposes that you're looking at the science in a certain way, that sort of thing counts as an observation. It's like one of those when people say just saying. No, you're not just saying it. You brought it up because you're making a point. I hate when people say just saying most of the time because it's trying to deflect responsibility. You're saying something that you think is important, and then you're trying to take back your responsibility for saying it. Who's up? Okay. So that's why, like, even when people say just saying, you know they're not just saying it. They said it for a reason. So observations are already theory laden. There is already something going on when people make observations. Why are those the observations they chose to make? So, author says, so we know too that both asserting and denying the viral etiology of COVID are likewise political moves, and even if only one side is uttering truths in the process. We know that images of the virus are social and political tools, that color pictures of coronavirus have been colored in, and that this coloring was done with some non-epistemic purpose, such as creating alarm or luring viewers to a news program or whatever. Author says, like, parenthetically, I did not see any drab-colored depictions of the virus. So, like, here, Lermfish. You want to know why this is important? Has anyone ever noted that you didn't see any drab-colored depictions of the virus? Like, this is a good point. The coloring of the virus was politically and socially motivated. Who actually decided that color scheme for the virus? Like, that actually is a social move. Yeah. So this is why you read philosophy. Sometimes you get, I didn't think about the coloring of the virus, but like that has nothing to do with the science. Like when you saw pictures of it. All those pictures were colored in a certain way. And it was kind of consistent with the red and, you know, what makes you think that was accurate? Yeah. Well, no, yeah, that's exactly right. Philosophy is important because the virus's color is not scientific. That's a media thing, and that's something that is a scientific, what's it called? You know, that's a social thing. That is why it's important, because it points out that it wasn't a scientifically valid color scheme. I mean, do you know if it's a scientifically valid color scheme? These people do. And that's why we listen to these people, because then you start to realize that some of the things were, you know, rhetoric that were not science. Author says, we know about the existence of biases that most people do not know about. Publication, financial, selection, and more, and we understand them better than many of those scientists who are aware of their existence. Thus, for example, we know that scientists who promote their work are simultaneously sharing their findings and furthering their own careers, as indeed we are, and that this can shape their findings, their reactions to criticism, and so forth, even when they are, as we are, insensible of the fact. Maybe it does not take a philosopher to say this, but a philosopher can say it without seeming to be or becoming a wholesale science denier, because philosophers have 6 decades of scholarship behind them to back up what they say. Yeah, so this is the thing. why was the, like, what is the rhetoric of science, so, like, I forget the word, but here, you know, Alarmfish, you changed your color, it looks like. I guess not to be, lining up with Mr. Partiardi. I wonder if you did that on purpose. That's funny, though. And also because I was talking about the color. That's funny. But that's the point. It's like, who's pointing out that the coloring of the coronavirus was kind of consistent and done to alarm people? Yeah. So. Yeah, did you pick it because it was an alarming color? Okay. Author says, we know too that knowledge claims are subject to social and political forces. Yeah, this is another thing that like has kind of been recent claiming. That people who claim knowledge, it's a lot of social and political bullshit that goes into why people claim knowledge. That having power includes having the power to say what is a fact. Another point. Who gets to call what is, say what a fact is? You think it's simple, it's not. When the World Health Organization declares, as it did in early 2020, that wearing a mask is ineffective in preventing the spread of COVID-19, we know that it is not merely, and in this case not at all, reporting a scientific output, but it is also exercising agency in pursuit of a goal in the big, wide world. Yeah, facts, exactly, Mr. Partiardi. In this case, the objective seems to have been to keep masks available for health workers, which implies that the people were deceived in order to prevent them from doing something that could, at least possible, have saved their lives, as argued by Eli I. Lichtenstein in this issue. We know that policies are made in the interests of the rich and powerful, even when the explicit justification is altruistic, as when Ebola in West Africa in 2014 prompted an international response, while outbreaks in other parts of the continent had not done so. The difference was that the outbreaks in West Africa were larger and appeared to pose a risk of spreading to wealthier, more powerful regions. Thus, we know in advance of a public health emergency that whatever policies are adopted, they will probably not be altruistic. They will probably serve the interests of the rich and powerful of the world first, and those of the weak and poor either by chance or not at all. In the absence of strenuous, persistent advocacy, altruistic policy happens only by mistake. And so yeah, so again to Viper's point, now they're shitting on everyone else. The philosophers, instead of saying we fucked up, now they're shitting on everyone else, saying, well, we may have fucked up, but you guys are worse. Author says, naturally, what we conclude from these and other parts of our knowledge web differs. We might incline towards realism or relativism, we might espouse or reject a value-free ideal of inquiry, and so forth. But we are aware of the complications that give rise to these differences of opinion. We understand, I take it, that much of what was said during the pandemic about science, health, and disease, among other things, was ill-conceived. Yet as a collective, we were not vociferous in saying so. So, this is the thing. Now they're getting back to what they think they could have done differently. Like, they know all the bullshit, and did they call anyone out? I don't know. We can dissect the inner workings of drug approval agencies. We can show how bias may persist even through complex layers of experiment and analysis designed to eliminate them. We can parse what the psychiatric authorities have to say about mental ailments, so we can certainly make short work of follow the science. We can explain why treating the scalar herd immunity as a strategic objective is an error and that it serves certain interests. We can unpick the obsession by various parties over single variables. One was the R number, another was the infection fatality ratio. We can and should make visible the absence of women from public-facing roles, at least in Britain and the US, and the lack of any notable provision for domestic abuse. We can and should resist the pillorying of experts, notably female, notably of color, who openly disputed this perceived scientific mainstream. We can illuminate the rhetoric of fact and expert, of unprecedented threat and threat to humanity, and so on for a huge number of other travesties of intellectual and social justice. We can do this not only after the fact in academic journals, but at the same time in public debate. Where were our critical skills? Wherever they were largely invisible. Alright, so finally they're coming around to the point. Like, they are just saying they were largely silent on a lot of stuff that they could have done. Again, hindsight saying, look, we could have done more, but we didn't. And now the question is why? 3. Doing no harm. You might be thinking, sure, COVID is caused by a virus, vaccinations do work, modelers ought to have been listened to. If we philosophers had come swinging in with public critiques of science, we would have fanned the flames of unhelpful, dangerous dissent. Kuhn is fine for the seminar room, but this is the real world. Publish academic papers if you like, but don't go on TV trying to dispute with experts who, even if they, like all of us, are enmeshed in the messiness of social and political life, are fundamentally right, and whose knowledge is going to save us from widespread disaster. Author says they agree with part of this sentiment, and I strongly reject the other part. I agree that it is quite possible to meddle, to pronounce things that look easy from the outside, when in truth we have no idea what we are talking about. I reject the idea that deploying the body of philosophical skill knowledge indicated above during the pandemic would have amounted to doing that. One piece of evidence for this claim is that those philosophers who did engage publicly did not, as a rule, do so in an irresponsible or unhelpful way. There were a number of public engagements. I was involved in some of them, and I'm biased as regards those. But there were a number of others which I'm not going to mention because I will inevitably do injustice to someone by leaving some out. In my own opinion, a few of these were unhelpful, for example, in failing the criticality condition set out below, but the majority were interesting and useful. Their usefulness came in a variety of forms, not solely in the anointment of some discourse with a special property of conceptual clarity, nor was their engagement confined to the more familiar terrain of political philosophy. It was proper engagement in a public forum in terms of the kinds of things that we philosophers of medicine are experts in, and for the most part, this engagement did not bear out the alarmist fears. This shows that philosophers can engage without meddling. How should we do it, and can we know when we're passing the limits of our skill knowledge? So they're saying it is being done well, sometimes. Specifically in relation to epidemics, the answer is partly in preparation. We should continue to build expertise in philosophy of epidemiology and public health. I'm biased. These are my specialisms. Specializations. Okay, specialisms. Never seen that word before. But the reason for this is that I felt ever since I've learned the word that epidemiology is much more important than people have generally realized, and that epidemiology and public health are not widely understood. The pandemic has changed the former, but not, I fear, the latter. Philosophy of epidemiology and philosophy of public health can help improve the understanding of these fields, including that of the scientists in them, who sometimes have quite remarkable ideas about what they are doing. Yet, philosophy of epidemiology and public health remain underpopulated in areas of scholarship, and the more you know that you don't know, and the less likely you are to meddle and make an unhelpful contribution. Another part of the answer is simply to learn to exercise judgment. People are so terrible at exercising judgment. That's just, yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah, everyone should be smart and, like, not be assholes, but, like, you can't tell people that. We're gonna be assholes. We know that people with technical expertise can easily get it wrong by overselling their conclusions, failing to mention or perhaps forgetting that their model is a simplification or that their inference concerns a specific domain. Philosophers are more likely to fall prey to different vices, such as adopting a striking position and adroitly defending it. This gets you seminar invitations, workshops, special issues, and citations. There is even the remote prospect of immortalization on undergraduate reading lists, the ultimate goal of a philosophical career. I mean, this is snarky right here. It does not, however, help people in other domains form good judgments, so it does not further public debate in a way that might ultimately lead to better policy. In our public engagements, we must modify our concern for distinctions when they are not pertinent, and our propensity to think of ways to sustain a position or attack when this is simply not appropriate. We can practice our discipline as if it mattered, and then perhaps it will. This is important right here. This last line. We can practice our discipline as if it mattered, and then perhaps it will. And this is what Learnfish may have been bringing up earlier. Like, you can do stuff and people will care. If you're acting like it doesn't matter, like you're treating it like it's a dumb game, a bad game, just a silly game to be won, then no one's gonna give a shit, because people got better things to do than to play a silly game with you that you've stacked in your favor. Like, I was at a friend's house for, a little a holiday party last weekend, and they have an 8-year-old, and I somehow got into an argument with the 8-year-old that I don't have bones. And she's not a dumb 8-year-old. I'll fake it till you make it, absolutely. But, like, she's not a dumb 8-year-old, and she knows I have bones, but I don't have to admit I have bones. If I want to keep arguing and, like, find ways out of the argument, I can keep doing that. And then, like, eventually I was, like, hitting my own teeth. I was like, I guess I might have bones because I have teeth. And, like, teeth are technically a bone, I guess. But, like, she couldn't, like, process, like, that level of, that inference that, like, I have teeth. I was just maintaining I have no other bones in my body, like I don't have a skull. It's like, I can keep arguing stuff that's completely ridiculous. Granted, it was only against an 8-year-old, but, like, she's not... No, she was arguing... Well, you're saying I don't have a spine. That can have multiple meanings. You may be right, Vipers. No, she was arguing that I have a rib cage, actually, and that, that's how I'm able to breathe. So she knew that, like, your rib cage and your, like, lungs were related, and that if you don't have a rib cage, you can't breathe. So she was actually arguing along that line, although she was not arguing that I don't have a spine. Thank you. With that, it's made out of rubber. But, like, yeah, this is the thing. I can, like, it was very silly because I'm arguing with an 8-year-old and it was kind of fun. But, like, she was getting frustrated at times, so I dropped it. But, like, I was... like, I can keep going. I don't need to stop on a lot of arguments. But there's the thing. You have to understand when is the time to argue. If you're having fun with your friend's 8-year-old, that's a fine time to keep arguing dumb points because it was funny. If you're trying to make other people care about what you do in, like, terms of public policy, then you have to have better judgment. And so if you practice, like, people should listen to what you're saying, maybe then, like, people will, but, like, again, that's harder. Alright, 4. What we did not do much. Author says, I have shared my opinion that the philosophical contributions to public debate around COVID were, for the most part, good, but I am disappointed that they were not more numerous. Therefore, I call for more contributions from the philosophy of medicine, broadly construed, to public debates, especially concerning epidemics, epidemiology, and public health. I am not wholly sure what public debate is. This is one of my big problems here on Philosophy Roulette. What is the public that you are dealing with? What is the public? Like, who knows? I don't actually understand this. But the author can say something about the kinds of activities they are calling for. They should be public, critical, and timely. What justifies these criteria? First, publicity. When many people are chipping in with ideas about what to do, it is not always helpful to throw in one's 2 cents. However, there have been situations where our field ought to have been able to offer something useful. We philosophers of medicine do have relevant expertise. If many of us were uncertain to say, perhaps, if many of us were uncertain what to say, perhaps this means our preparation was lacking. Perhaps we have been studying the wrong things. Or perhaps it means that we are not appropriately trained to engage publicly, although I fear this is sometimes an excuse, or perhaps it means something else again. Anyway, whatever the problem is, we should fix it. There's always the problem with your job in philosophy, that the jobs are tenuous. And so spending time on other things that aren't going to help you keep your job is going to be difficult. But, like, this is the thing. There is very little incentive to be more public, except in times of need, and those are few and farther between. But maybe not. Maybe we have to find a way that engaging with more people than just academia is worth something to academia. Bringing in more money, if you will. If you could bring in more money in terms of, future resistance to epidemics, then you'd get more funding in, and then maybe more people studying philosophy. Infernal, how you doing? What's going on? We're reading something on, this is an editorial, but, what could philosophers of medicine have done more of during the pandemic? Yeah, so. And anyone who doesn't know Anne should give Anne a shout out. Anyone should, who is not following Infernal, our buddy has graduate degrees in sociology, recently out of academia, and is doing normie job, as she put the other day. Go follow. She's good fun, plays games and chats a lot, so among other things. I'm doing okay. I drank more water today, which I needed to do, and so I'm less dehydrated. I had, not been hydrating, and I can feel it. So I'm okay at the moment. I really burned myself out last time. I was dehydrated and did way too much philosophy, and I was just dead after last stream. But now at the moment, I'm feeling okay. I'm going to still try to keep it a little bit on the short side today. But yeah. Tasting your burps. Wonderful, Vipers. And you can see I modded Vipers, which makes me actually maybe more happy than it makes Vipers. Rather entertained by this. Okay, so what this is, going on. What can philosophers of medicine do? They can be more public about their stuff, and now we're going on to their criticality. Second, criticality. The pandemic was a knowledge war. Those who ruled the epistemic high ground shaped policy. It is striking how a field that routinely, at times perhaps carelessly, offers criticisms of the biomedical model and evidence-based medicine, exposes the activity of concealed influence of financial interests, explains the operation of various kinds of bias, rails at the epistemic injustice of neglecting lived experiences, and so on, nonetheless offered remarkably muted criticisms of science during the pandemic. Our acquiescence as a field was a betrayal of our prima facie commitment as philosophers. To dispute this is to assert that our normal criticality has been revealed as irresponsible. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. We know a lot of what was said during the pandemic was bullshit, and did anyone call them out in a responsible way? Third, timeliness. Perhaps the irony of, say, publishing detailed work on the precautionary principle 8 months after the time of the precaution was taken can only be missed by a philosopher. No doubt such work serves the purpose of scholarship, but it cannot be said to form part of the pandemic response if the decision upon which it might bear has been taken half a year before. Viper asks, is it because I'll likely only invoke my modding powers when it's funny to do so? No, I think because it wrong-footed you for like half a second when you were like, oh my god, I'm actually a mod. And that's why I find it entertaining, because you did not know what you were doing for a second in chat. So I found that entertaining. Not, I mean, I expect you'll invoke your modding powers exactly how you treat the rest of chat, which I find fine. So that's cool. But, the half second of uncertainty is what I was laughing at. Sometimes philosophers have defined their discipline as if it were as if it were one that makes no difference beyond the philosopher, a game, a therapy, an exercise of harmonizing contradictory intuitions. I take it that philosophers of medicine do not tend toward such views, since medicine is a field that makes a great deal of difference beyond its philosophers, and this is part of why they study it. Yeah, and if Lerm, you're here, Lermfish, you're still here. I don't know if you are, but like, this is the whole point. This is what I was saying. If it's just a silly game or like a therapy, and people are doing it to make themselves feel better, why should anyone else care? But in this case, it does. If we can say things that will make our public policy better, which these sorts of philosophers do, then philosophy does matter, because it does have application in these times of crisis. So like, it's like, people generally do not ask me, that's fine, Vipers, if he is or isn't. Like, the point still stands. People generally don't ask for my help until it is far too late. Like, they are basically shit out of all ideas, and then they're like, oh my god, maybe Nogur Zero knows something. And that is actually when I get a lot of like, save me, Nogur Zero, I don't know what to do anymore. Like, in the history of like my friends asking for stuff, it's always like the last resort. I'm like, you could have asked earlier. But like, this is the thing, philosophers do know stuff, and they know stuff that like other people don't know. And so what happens is people exhaust all of their, what they do know, and then they have to go looking for stuff that they may have missed, and then they ask philosophers, save me. Exactly. Like, this is, I'm not kidding. I end up getting these like sort of weird requests when people are like, they're out of ideas. And so again, this is when the philosophers could have had an opportunity, when people didn't know what to do, and they could have stepped in and said, no, we understand what is happening in terms of like the public policy dealing with medicine. So it's like this could have been an opportunity, and it would have made a difference at that point. So it is a missed opportunity. I remember in high school when my buddy started asking me questions, he got really nervous about, what was it? Some like ethical thing, and they're like, no, you're wise. You tell me. I'm like, I'm not wise. I don't know shit. Papa wrote to our philosophers, yeah. So it's like, but like when people exhaust what they normally think about, then they go looking for other stuff, and then that's where the philosophers, you might find something like some philosopher said that you find interesting. It's just how it goes. Okay. Philosophy does not measure its value directly through its impact on others, and nor does anything I have said imply this. If you disagree, feel free to submit your proof as an analysis piece to this journal. Yet when it does have an effect, the effect is profound. Philosophy has shaped our democracies, our science, our property rights, our rights to life and suicide. It has, even in the time of Galen, shaped our medicine. These interventions were never welcome. Philosophers specialize in uncomfortable truths. So it is all the more important that we train ourselves to articulate them, position ourselves to be listened to, and take the risk inherent in raising our voices when everyone else is saying something different. Yeah, so this is the thing. You run out of things that you were comfortable with, you have to go to something you were not comfortable with. And that's, the uncomfortable truth is actually an interesting thing. Why are truths something that can be uncomfortable? Like, what is comfortable about some and uncomfortable about others? It's like things you did not think about, are they uncomfortable, or are they just something you get comfortable with certain ideas, and then like anything outside of that is uncomfortable. That doesn't make them bad, it just makes them like sort of foreign or alien, and like that's part of the issue. Okay, so 5, we must do better. Timothy Williamson presented a critique of philosophy in an address at a major conference under the title Must Do Better. In criticizing contemporary work in metaphysics and philosophy more broadly, he compared himself to the headmaster of a minor public, the British word for private school, after a disappointing term. I have no illusions. I am not on Williamson's intellectual level, nor do I intend to hold myself above the rest of the field of philosophy of medicine, but I can count the number of philosophical contributions that were public, critical, and timely, and I can get a rough sense of how influential the field was as a whole. Maybe your assessment is less dim than mine. If I have gone too far, it would not be the first time, but decisive advocacy for a position provides the opportunity to refute it. I hope the field will take this opportunity. Alright, so this was a cute little editorial. I think it brought up some good points, like basically, what is the value of philosophy in the particular case here? Yeah, we could have done better as philosophers during the pandemic. More could have been done. But, like the philosophers did the academic, burrowing, like hiding thing. Like they burrowed into their academia, they hid in their books, and basically that's what they did. They hibernated like everyone else, basically, and it was not probably the best thing that could have been done. We could have done better, must do better, because at that point it was the time to go get a little bit messy, because that would have been the time when more ideas would have been beneficial to the public, as opposed to only hearing like the ideas of like the people in power that were trying to do the right thing, and then like the crazy people that were just screaming against them. It would have been better to have a more thought out disagreement about certain ideas, and not been like the screeching voices that we did have. All right, any questions about this though? I mean, I don't have a lot to say. Again, this was a editorial, and which is cool. Like, I thought it was good. What philosophy can do in times of crisis is actually, I think, a good point. Philosophy has more to say in times of crisis than a lot of other stuff. So, yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Where was that, like, the little thing? So, what should philosophers do? They should be public, they should be critical, and they should be timely. There is no reason why philosophy can't always be like this. Why can't philosophy always have a public, critical, and timely aspect to it? Now, what is like currently contemporary? Like, we could talk about the AI stuff. Now, we could go to the blog Aesthetic for Birds, and I think they have talked about the AI art. And so that, and do they do it in a public way? Yes. And is it critical? Yes. But like, who's actually going to the Aesthetics for Bird website? I think a lot of people actually, but are they really getting involved with like the AI art and what it's gonna, how bad it's gonna screw with people in the world? I don't know. But like, this is part of the thing. Like, that could be done on the internet right now, because it is a timely, critical, and public thing that philosophers could do. And so like, this is I think nice way of thinking about what the goal of public philosophy again could be. Like I was saying before, I have no idea what the public is. This is a very hard concept for me. Who is the public when in terms of philosophy? I don't understand it. So if any of you guys have ideas, let me know. But like, who is actually interested in anything? Most of the time people are interested in, whatever they're interested in. So alright, but that's it for this, I guess.